So Peter Sutcliffe has died at the age of 74. No tears shed, I'm sure, not a nice man. But for anyone too young to remember or not from the UK, Sutcliffe was a prolific serial killer who was convicted of murdering 13 women and attempting to murder 7 others. The murders for which he was convicted took place in West Yorkshire and Manchester in the north of England, spanning 1975 to 1980. And now he's dead. But this article by Julie Bindel on Unheard, put out just before he died, compares Sutcliffe with another serial killer, or not, as Bindel claims, Eileen Wuornos. Wuornos was a woman who was convicted and executed for the murder of 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990. For the record, we don't have capital punishment in the UK, nor am I in favour of it. Bindel writes, "When I hear that Peter Sutcliffe, the serial killer known as the Yorkshire Ripper, is expected to die at any moment, I think about monsters like him and how his murderous reign of terror left its stamp not just on the victims and their loved ones, but on women everywhere." Well, not really, Julie. Most women in the world have never heard of him. She continues, "There are monsters, though, and there are misrepresentations. Can we even begin to compare a man who rapes, murders and defiles the bodies of his female victims to Eileen Wuornos, a woman who perfectly fit the profile of a victim of a serial killer such as Sutcliffe, but who instead has been represented as his female counterpart? They even made a film about her, Monster." Well, I don't think calling people monsters, whoever they are, is constructive. It's just pretense. We are pretending that they are so unlike us that they are not human, because humans don't do this sort of thing. But if we were going to call people monsters, then we need to be consistent. So Miss Wuornos more closely fits the profile of a victim of a monster than of a monster. Really? Well, surely, Miss Bindel, that depends on the actions of the person concerned. It is true that Sutcliffe targeted prostitutes, or those he thought were prostitutes. For him, they were soft targets. And it is true that Wuornos earned her living as a prostitute. But she wasn't being prosecuted for being a prostitute. She was prosecuted for murdering 7 men. I don't think the same can be said of any victim of Sutcliffe. Bindel. The story of Eileen Wuornos, branded America's first female serial killer, sits on that blurry edge between fact and fiction. Her life reads like the bleakest of horror stories, in which there is no reprieve or redemption, but instead a trail of death and destruction, culminating in her execution by lethal injection. At the age of 46, the former prostitute was put to death in Florida in 2002, having killed 7 men. In self-defense, she always claimed. Wuornos' life was hell from the day she was born. Her mother was barely 14 when she married 16-year-old Leo Dale Pittman. He was already a serial sex offender, and at the time Wuornos was born, in 1956, he was in prison for the rape of a child. He later hanged himself while still inside. Certainly, Wuornos' life could not be described as easy. Many people have difficult lives. Many serial killers have difficult lives. Most people who don't have easy lives don't go on to become serial killers. And the claim that she has always maintained that it was self-defense is contradicted by her words, as we shall see. Incidentally, as Wuornos never met her father, he at least could never have been her abuser. When she was 4, Wuornos and her brother were abandoned by their mother and sent to live with their alcoholic and abusive grandparents. The young girl was repeatedly raped by multiple family members, and by the time she was 11 was being sexually abused by boys and men in the neighbourhood in return for cigarettes, booze and what she understood as affection. Well, no source is quoted for these claims. In fact, there are no references at all. I guess the only person we have as a reference for this is Wuornos herself. Anyway, read the article yourself. Wuornos is a victim, etc. She lashed out in self-defense. She was abused. In short, even when killing 7 men, she was the victim. Certainly she seems to have had a crappy life. But few who have crappy lives go on to be killers, and despite what Bindel claims, this woman was a serial killer. So what about her claims of self-defence? What did Wuornos actually do? Well, she killed 7 men over 12 months. Those men were Richard Charles Mallory, shot several times. She claims she was sodomised and beaten by him and acted in self-defence. David Andrew Spears, shot 6 times. Charles Edmund Cascadoon, shot 9 times. Peter Abraham Seames, body never found. Troy Eugene Burris, shot twice. Charles Richard Humphreys, shot 6 times in the head and in the torso. Walter Jano Antonio, shot 4 times. Remember, all this took place over a year. Were all those justifiable cases of self-defence? Were these all violent Johns? And despite what Bindel says, Wuornos did not always claim that the killings were in self-defence. She stated, "I killed those men, robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again." True, she was a mixed-up individual, but then which serial killers aren't? Sutcliffe himself spent time in a prison psychiatric hospital for schizophrenia. So if we must forgive Wuornos, then we must also forgive Sutcliffe.